Good morning, Chair Hasid. We are now recording, and I've admitted everyone from the waiting room.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. First, before we get started, we are going to review how to select your preferred language so you can have sufficient audio quality for the meeting. Even if you can hear me now, if you're on the Zoom application, please go down to the bottom and towards the right-hand side, you'll see a language button. Please select either English or Spanish, and I will turn it over to Santiago, who will relay those instructions as well.
Buenos días y gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Ahora estamos ofreciendo interpretación para que pueda escuchar la junta en español y además si quiere escucharlo en inglés, por favor elija o vaya hacia abajo de su pantalla para hacerle clic en el glóbulo que dice interpretación y escoja, o sea, español o inglés. Gracias.
Thank you, Santiago. All right. This meeting of the Agricultural Labor Relations Board is now called to order. First, I will call the roll. Board Member Broad?
Here.
Board Member Flores?
Present.
Thank you. Board Member Hall?
Present.
Thank you. Board Member Lightstone?
Present.
Okay. Also present from our staff today is our Executive Secretary, Santiago Avila Gomez, as well as our staff member, Devika Ganawardena, and they're both providing technical support. We'll first start today with the open session portion of our meeting, which includes an informational panel, which I'm very excited about. And then prior to going to closed session, we'll provide an opportunity for public comment on any portion of the meeting. Members of the public who have contacted the board either by email or phone and asked to be placed in the public comment queue will be called on in the order received. If you did not previously contact the board and wish to make a public comment, you still may do so, and you can alert us in one of several ways. You can make a request in the Zoom chat function. You can raise your hand, also in the Zoom function, or physically, if we can see you. Or email Santiago Avila Gomez to be placed in the queue for public comment. Please note, we ask that you use the chat feature only to indicate that you wish to make a comment. Substantive comments in the chat will not be made part of the public record. We ask that you also provide your name and organization if applicable. This information will become a part of the official record of today's proceedings. If you wish to speak more than once, please alert staff and have your name placed back in the queue if you are able. If you have technical difficulties when you are called up, please reach out to us via the Zoom chat function or email, and we will come back to you. We do have limited capabilities for managing public participation during the meeting, so we do ask that you either mute your computer or your device when you are not speaking. These instructions are also available on our agenda, which is on our website at alrb.ca.gov, both on the homepage as well as on the meeting tab. Okay, on to our next agenda item, which is to approve the meeting minutes from our most recent meeting on April 5th. 2023. May I have a motion?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, minutes from April 5th are approved. Our next agenda item is the chair's report, and as noted, I will be introducing the ALRB's draft strategic plan for 2023-2026. I am very excited to finally be able to share this with the larger world. This has been a long but very important process, and one that I've been so grateful to the board members, to our staff especially, to the rest of the executive team, and to a variety of stakeholders, members of legislative staff, administrator, other parts of the administration, farm workers, employers, all who have provided thoughtful input to help us inform how we do our work. And I'm very excited to have the draft to share with you all for review and discussion. As noted, it was really critical to the executive team that we have input from a variety of stakeholders. So this was not a top-down process, and it was really critical to us that we had the input from staff. As my colleague, Member Lightstone, often comments, the staff, our frontline staff members that are in our regional and sub-regional offices are those who really do the work, those who are driving this organization forward and working to ensure that we fulfill our mission and our duty to the public and to farm workers in particular. And it was so critical to us that we hear their input and get their thoughts as to how we can improve our work, where we should focus our priorities. And I really see our role as listening to that and helping provide that administrative support so that they can go out and do their job. And I'm just really grateful for all that feedback. This is our first strategic plan in quite some time, and I'm hoping it can drive a focus to the way we do our work for the next few years. Many of the goals that have been outlined in the plan are things that staff have been working on, and this is really a way to kind of level set and get everyone on the same page and come to a consensus about when, we have a million things to do, how we focus our efforts, what should be our guiding star, our guiding principles, and also how we carry out that work, our commitment to each other and to the public in terms of fairness and collaboration and working with our partners. And that's something we're going to hear about a little bit more in the panel today too. As you can see, we laid out our core values, fairness, our responsibility, commitment to justice, and strengthening our communities. And then we carry these values through our four main goals, which really focus on, one, improving the knowledge and understanding of both the Act, the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, as well as the work of the board. Additionally, empowering our staff and engaging them and making sure that we are helping ensure this is a good place to work and that we're attracting the best and brightest, most committed public servants. And I believe that we do that, and we do have those great public servants, and we want to keep them and make sure that they have the tools to do their work effectively, and that's an ongoing process. And then also ensure that we're meeting the needs of the agricultural community and specifically farm workers. This is a population that, as we're going to hear about more later today, works incredibly hard, provides essential work to all of our communities and to the world, frankly, here in California, and one that unfortunately disproportionately suffers adverse consequences from things like climate change and the pandemic and other economic disparities and inequalities in our society. And it's something that, as we think about how we serve this population and ensure that they know about the rights under our Act and are able to access them, are we focusing our energies in a manner that ensures that we're able to do that effectively? So again, just really grateful for all the support here. Wanted to make a few notes. There are some items that we have identified for early action. This plan has been in development stages for a variety of reasons for quite some time, but we have still been moving forward on the work. So several items that we have identified are, one, the workforce plan and recruitment and retention plan. This is something our administrative staff and HR team, Brian and Michelle and others, have been working on, and they believe will be available by this summer. So very excited about that. We do have some critical vacancies, and I think that'll help guide our recruitment efforts and ensure that we're expanding the ways that we try and reach candidate pools for these hard-to-fill positions and making sure we're getting the right candidates and letting them know about these opportunities. Additional goals that we've identified are, one, timelines and goals for processes. On the board side, on the board, we have identified several timelines to review matters, including critical one is issuing decisions within 90 days of receiving final briefing, and that is one that we have been mainly on track with one or two exceptions during our tenure, but one that we're committed to doing in order to ensure that these cases are adjudicated swiftly. We also identified having templates and resources for our staff for various processes and documents. And the general counsel program, I believe, is identified that they are able to launch that by July. It's something that's been in process, I think, informally, and the general counsel may talk more about that. Additionally, we've discussed cross-training in a variety of forums, and I am currently working with labor agency and other partners on developing a multi-labor agency training for staff about a variety of labor rights and protections with our sister state departments, as well as those that go beyond sort of the traditional employment perspective. And we're hoping to offer that ideally in September. It's going to take a little bit more coordination, but there are also other efforts for cross-training that I know staff are working on, both from a legal skills standpoint as well as various labor law enforcement, so that when we do engage with workers, we're able to address their concerns. So those are a few of the things that we've identified that we'll be able to deliver on the next few months. I'd like to open up the discussion to comment first from members of the board to see if they have any comments or feedback on the plan. Okay, and now, oh, Cynthia, yes.
It's just a general comment. I really wanted to uplift the work of our exec team in putting this together. It's been a very long, thoughtful, thorough process, and I really commend everyone's effort in kind of distilling all of that information, gathering and producing a document that's so easy to read. It's clear. And just an overall excellent product. So I just wanted to uplift that.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'd like to open it up to other members of the executive team or staff to comment. General Counsel, yes.
Hi, yes, thank you. I just wanted to also commend all of our staff and as well as our community members and stakeholders who provided input. This was a long process where there were several iterations of questions and prompts for people and exercises and whatnot. And there were a lot of different opportunities to participate. And I was very heartened and happy to see that our staff, especially like the staff that I work with most closely in the regional offices, were fully engaged. I mean, every single office took the feedback and reflected on it and provided additional thoughtful comments and ideas and information. And I just thought, as a result of that broad participation, we have a final product or a proposed final product that is thorough and actually useful. Is how I'm seeing it, that it's going to help guide us and be a really important compass for our work going forward. So just wanted to echo those thoughts that Member Flores said, but also to really acknowledge and commend our staff, as well as I know some of our community members and stakeholders who also provided feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other feedback or comments from staff or members of the public? Okay, all right. Well, thank you again. Can I have a motion to approve the draft strategic plan?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Broad. Can I have a second? Thank you, Member Lightstone. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, moving on. That concludes the chair's report. We are now moving on to the executive officer's report on unfair labor practices, compliance matters, and elections with Santiago Villa-Gomez. Santiago?
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. I apologize for having this microphone in front of me. I'm attempting to ensure that our interpreter is able to hear well. For today's report, I wanted to note that there has been one complaint settled in Monterey Mushrooms, Inc., case number 2020 CE 042 SAL and 2021 CE 007 SAL. The General Counsel filed a request to remove from the hearing calendar on April 20th, indicating that the parties were entering into a settlement agreement. With respect to the board's action, there have been 3 administrative orders since the last public meeting. 2 of them I'll take out of order, but relate to the same matter. That's Trifanuki Farms, ALRB Admin Order 2023-01 and ALRB Admin Order 2023-03. The first was issued on March 27th, the second on April 7th. Both admin orders were denying requests for special permission to appeal relating to the Maycole classification hearing relating to the board's decision 40 ALRB number 4. The third admin order they issued was in Professional Technical Union Local 33. That's ALRB Admin Order 2023-02-P, which indicates that it's precedential. And it issued on March 30th, and it was directed to the complaining party, licensee, challenge labor organization, and general counsel. The case number is 2023 LPA 001. Finally, turning to pending matters, there's Garwin Farms, Inc., case number 2012 CE 041 VIS et al. And that involves the board's prior decision in 44 ALRB number 1. This is a Maycole specification. Briefing is completed in that matter as of March 24th. The second pending matter is Lily's Green Garden Inc., case number 2020 CE 025 SAL and 2020 CE 037 SAL. That involves the general counsel's request for leave to seek court order to enforce compliance with the board's prior order decision in 48 ALRB number 3. And finally, right now in front of the board, the Professional Technical Union Local 33 matter will be returning after the general counsel completes their investigation. Finally, I'll mention that this report and other reports are available at the ALRB's website under the meetings tab. That concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Santiago. Thank you, Santiago. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Next, the next agenda item is the litigation report. We don't have anything today, and so we will then turn to the next agenda item, which is the General Counsel's report with General Counsel Julie Montgomery.
Thank you. So to start out, I want to begin by introducing and acknowledging Yesenia de Luna. I think she's on this call, and just announce that she has agreed to step in and serve as our interim regional director in the Visalia region while we seek to fill that position. So Yesenia is an attorney with our Santa Rosa sub-regional office, and she's been with the ALRB nearly 4 years now, and just want to thank Yesenia for stepping up and just introduce her to the board members. I thought she was here. But anyway, just wanted to acknowledge you. Oh, there she is. She's trying to get on camera. So thank you, Yesenia. There she is, popping in on the camera. I just wanted to introduce Yesenia and thank her for agreeing to take on this leadership role while we're in a transitional period. I'm going to start, as I usually do, by just letting you know about some informal settlements that our general counsel program has reached since the last board meeting. Of course, when we have formal settlements of cases that are in complaint, we hear about it from the executive secretary, as we just heard about the one case. But the general counsel program does a lot of work that never actually reaches the board, as we are investigating cases, negotiating settlements, et cetera. And so there's just really a lot of work that doesn't always show up in our official reports. So I like to take this opportunity to just highlight a few of those. One settlement that our staff reached is against involving respondent Strawberry Services, Inc. And this case involved a strawberry harvester in Santa Barbara County who filed a charge claiming that they were retaliated and discriminated against by having her employment terminated because she had requested and obtained COVID-19 supplemental sick leave pay. And she was complaining about that on behalf of herself and some coworkers she was also alleging were retaliated against for requesting the sick leave pay. And while the case was still in the investigative phase, the parties agreed to settle the matter with the ALRB, and that resulted in back wages, all lost wages to the worker who claimed she was terminated. And the ALRB will go into those fields and conduct the usual reading and noticing remedies and spend time with the workers explaining the case and the settlement. And so that will be upcoming. In addition, we also settled a case involving Writer Brothers, and this was for an agricultural worker who harvested strawberries in Ventura County, alleging that this company retaliated against her and her husband by not recalling them to work at the beginning of the work season because she had filed a prior charge with the ALRB that was investigated and settled with this company. And after the charge was filed, after the subsequent charge was filed, this recent charge, respondent did agree to rehire the charging party and her husband. So the company did rehire them and entered into a settlement agreement to compensate the workers for their back wages, which totaled $2,690. And they also agreed to the reading and noticing remedies, where an ALRB will go into the fields and speak to the workers, send mailings, and do postings. And we are also going to be conducting a training to supervisors of that company as well. And beyond the casework, of course, we have our staff out in the community doing a lot of outreach. And so I'd like to give a few highlights of that. So we, let's see, get to that page. We conducted an in-person worker training and tabling at a citizenship and resource fair in Oxnard. And our staff conducted a Spanish and Mixteco in-person worker presentation at a taller de liderazgo hosted by MyCop in Oxnard and Ventura County. Our staff conducted an in-person supervisor training in Spanish for the 25th annual agricultural exposition in Salinas, which was in Monterey County. And also a in-person Spanish worker presentation to Salinas adult school students, and a virtual training to Líderes Campesinas in Greenfield, also in Monterey County. And in addition, in the Visalia region, our staff provided a virtual training hosted by Líderes Campesinas to Lindsay in Tulare County. And we also had staff participating in La Hora Mixteca on Radio Bilingüe in Fresno and online. And our staff provided an interview in Spanish and Mixteco for a radio program El Informador on Radio Láser which broadcasts to the Central Valley. In addition, let's see, I think that covers most of it. Oh yeah, our staff has also attended multiple community events and tabled at over 20 events, which I don't want to take the time to review all of them right now, but I'll just tell you that they were present in Merced, Fresno, Tulare, Kern, Riverside, Imperial, Mendocino, Monterey, Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, and Ventura counties. They were physically present, attending events, passing out flyers and information during this past month or so since our last board meeting. And let's see, and I think finally, we also conducted Facebook Live interview in Spanish and Mixteco in Ventura. And I think, oh yes, and then a live radio interview on KBBF hosted by Líderes del Futuro in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. So as you can see, as usual, our staff have been very busy being out there spreading the word about the ALRB, who we are, what we do, and what workers' rights are. And that includes, as usual, partnering with other organizations to help bring information about farm worker rights to people throughout California. So that concludes my report for now. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Julie. Our next item on the agenda is the Administrative Officer's Report with our Chief Administrative Officer, Brian Doherty. Brian?
Good morning. Don't have a lot of updates today. The one thing I can speak to is the latest on the budget hearings that are occurring. Yesterday in the Senate Full Budget and Fiscal Review Committee, AB 113 was heard. This is the bill that is the trailer bill language cleanup for AB 2183 that was agreed to as part of the compromise that was in the governor's signing message. That bill passed on a 13-5 vote from the Senate Full Budget and Fiscal Review Committee. That bill is also being heard today in the full Assembly Budget Committee hearing as well at 2 o'clock. So we have not had any further budget hearings or committee hearings on any ALRB topics since our last board meeting. That's the only update I have on the administration side. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you, Brian. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? Okay, all right. Next on the agenda is our legislation report with Chief Board Counsel Todd Ratchin. Thoughts?
Do you need it back, or can I?
You could keep it.
You hear me okay? Well, I'm sure you guys can.
Yeah, Cynthia gave a thumbs up.
Okay, cool. Well, legislative report, Brian stole most of my thunder here, but I have a report that is available on the website regarding 2 budget trailer bills that are carrying the AB 2183 clarifying language. Those are AB 113 and SB 113. And there's links in the report to further information on the bills.
Thank you, Todd. I don't have any questions. Do any of my colleagues? Okay, thank you. And our next agenda item is the regulations report. Do we have any updates there?
No real updates, but I'll just, convey some information. The board currently has a regulation package that has been noticed and is out for public comment regarding the cannabis industry and labor peace agreements in the cannabis industry. The deadline to have requested a public hearing on the regulation package expired on April 21st. The written comment period closes on Monday, May 8th. And information regarding the regulation package is all available on the website.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Not seeing any questions. We will now move on to our informational panel on immigration and the farm worker population. I'm very excited that we are having this informational panel, and thank you to Board Member Flores for helping coordinate the efforts, and I'm just absolutely thrilled at the caliber of the panelists that we have speaking here today. I've had the pleasure of, one of them was a professor of mine, and also working and meeting with several of the other panelists in different capacities here at the board and prior. And this is what we're hoping to be the first of two different panels. The first one, this panel, being a real, overview, a primer regarding what is the nature of the different immigration status among the population. We know that a significant number is undocumented or does not have citizenship status. And so understanding the different statuses of the worker population, any trends. In the past few years, we've seen an expansion of H-2A. What does that mean? There's, DACA, other things. How is that impacting the particular worker population in this industry? And then also how that status impacts their ability to know and understand and exercise their rights. As we'll hear in more detail from the Dr. Flores from the UC Merced Community and Labor Center, who was part of a team that put on the farm worker health study released a few months ago. We know that, unfortunately, this population is still very afraid of addressing their rights and has cited immigration as a concern, and we'll get more detail in the study about that. But that's something that, I know that many that our staff, our board, many of my colleagues and our panelists have all worked to address for quite some time. It was about 10 years ago that the state passed, it was one of the first things I ever worked on with Board Member Lightstone and in our prior roles at Labor Agency and Industrial Relations, working on legislation to provide specific protections for immigrants and specific penalties to employers and others that may retaliate against workers and weaponize their lack of status against them as a way to intimidate them. We've seen bills to ensure that undocumented can have their driver's license. We've seen ensuring that workers in ag have the same rights as others with the rollback of the inequitable overtime provisions that are now in effect. But we are still seeing, despite these efforts and numerous others, a high level of fear among the population, and the immigration status is still really impacting how these workers are able to work and live and thrive in our communities. And so with that, I'm excited to turn over to the panelists and have an interesting discussion. I believe we are still waiting on our colleagues from the UC Merced Labor Center. So I will go ahead to Professor Magda Perez, who is both the head of the UC Davis Immigration Clinic, and take a personal point of privilege. When I was debating about attending UC Davis Law School, it was listening to her and hearing her work that really motivated me, and she's had a huge impact on my career. I know she's had the pleasure of working alongside our executive officer and our general counsel, and as well as board member Lightstone, and I believe several others. She has impacted the careers of hundreds of students and really thousands of individuals, and does such great work both at the clinic as well as the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. And I'm excited to hear kind of her thoughts on what she is seeing now in this population. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Professor Perez.
Thank you, Chairwoman. It's a privilege, and thank you for that very, very generous introduction. I was wondering, is it possible for me to share a PowerPoint? Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Santiago will help facilitate that.
Okay, so let me just go ahead and bring that up really quickly. Sorry. Okay. I apologize. I should have practiced this. Can everybody see the screen?
We can, and yes, I
Okay.
can't even get as far as you've gotten now, so you're doing great by my count.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I'm not sure how to like maneuver, so hopefully I can just do this from the beginning. Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you again for the opportunity. I know that some of you are familiar with California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. I did want from the beginning to make the distinction. There are two organizations. California Rural Legal Assistance, Inc. is a legal services organization statewide, an exceptional legal services organization focusing on the rural community. CRLA Foundation is a sister organization. CRLA Foundation does not receive any federal funding, which allows us to represent communities and engage in class action litigation and legislative advocacy, which are usually things that federally funded legal services organizations are not able to do. And I bring that up again because a lot of the work that CRLA Foundation does in working with farm worker communities and legislative advocacy are things that CRLA cannot do. So I just didn't want our work to be attributed to CRLA. CRLA Foundation's.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but can you actually explain that distinction in and of itself? Because I think that's an interesting starting point, just why there's a separate foundation to work with the immigrant population.
Right.
Yes,
thank you. Yes. So in the 80s, Congress passed restrictions on federally funded legal services organizations, indicating that they could not use federal funds, their federal funds, to represent undocumented communities, that they cannot engage in class action litigation and cannot do legislative advocacy. So at that time, when there was the risk that these federally funded organizations might lose their funding, CRLA Inc.'s executive director at that time, Alberto Saldamando, created CRLA Foundation so that CRLA Foundation could continue the work that CRLA would not be able to do to ensure that rural communities would have the most comprehensive legal advocacy possible, which did involve legislative advocacy, class action litigation as needed. And given the significant percentage of undocumented communities in California focusing on farm work, then to make sure that these communities would continue to have legal representation. CRLA Foundation continues to be one of the few legal services organizations in California that provides the broad range of legal services and advocacy and does not charge for any of our services to these rural communities that happen to be the most vulnerable because of their isolation in rural communities, but also because of their undocumented status. It makes them more vulnerable to notario fraud. It makes them more vulnerable to labor and employment and housing abuses. Okay. So CRLA Foundation has a number of priority areas that, again, focus on the legal and advocacy needs of these communities. Among them are Citizenship and Immigration Project, our Education Equity, Environmental Justice, Labor and Employment, Pesticide and Work Safety, Rural Health, Rural Housing, and Workers' Rights. I go to the next one. So let me skip that. So we talked a little bit about that. So, within our communities, and California, houses one of the, greatest mixed status communities, which involves, communities that have undocumented family members, lawful permanent residents, and U.S. citizens. And most of the time, the U.S. citizens are the children. For the undocumented communities, of course, even though they are afforded some legal rights and protections, undocumented communities have the least amount of rights and benefits afforded to them because of their undocumented status. From there, we move on to the childhood arrivals, especially those that are giving deferred action for childhood arrivals, even though they do have some protections that are available to them, their status is still considered to be undocumented. So they are here because they have prosecutorial discretion, that basically the government knows that they're here, but they won't deport them. Within, the undocumented community, many of them entered without inspection, but there's also like 40% entered, I apologize, with visas or other status and overstayed their authorized stay. So as soon as their authorized stay ends, then they become undocumented at the time and are also vulnerable to immigration enforcement. The childhood arrivals, again, even though they do have some limited protections, are also considered to be undocumented. And individuals who are currently in the process of regularizing their immigration status are considered to be undocumented until they gain some type of legal immigration status. The childhood arrivals, was one of the I think that under the Obama administration really kind of tried to address some of the legal needs of children who had been here for a long time, were ready to go to college and just did not have access to a lot of the resources. So these protections, again, that are in the form of prosecutorial discretion, provides temporary relief from removal, gives them work authorization, a social security card, and in California, a regular driver's license, which is not marked as used for federal purposes only. Currently, USCIS is not approving initial applications for DACA, but they are allowing the renewal of these the DACA applications, which must be renewed every 2 years, and pay a filing fee of $495, which this is one of the immigration forms for which USCIS does not accept fee waivers. Luckily, the California legislature, working with a coalition of nonprofit organizations advocating on behalf of immigrant communities, have put in place what they call the DNAF. So it's for DACA naturalization assistance fee waiver, so that for those people who are very low income, they can apply for these fee waivers to cover their fees. Okay, DACA provides them with work authorization, which is available to them until their DACA expires. Right now, DACA's future is before the U.S. Supreme Court, so we're still waiting, to see what that happens. The good thing is that for those who have been issued these Social Security numbers, they remain their Social Security numbers regardless of what happens to DACA or their immigration situation in the future. DACA recipients do not have an obligation to tell their employer about changes for DACA. And so I think, that also requires some education out in the community, because many employers are very concerned about hiring DACA recipients, which we consider to be actually discrimination on the basis of their immigration status. Okay. The next kind of stage over are those that are eligible for non-immigrant visas, which is lawful status in the United States, but does not provide them with the pathway to lawful permanent residence or U.S. citizenship unless that there's another means for them to transfer their status over. The most typical ones that people have heard about, are the visitors for business or for pleasure, student visas as well, the H-2A that are agricultural workers that are here to provide labor. There's the H-2B, which are the non-agriculture visas, the T visa for those that are victims of trafficking, and then the U visas that are victims of certain crimes. Through their cooperation with law enforcement, will give them non-immigrant status for 4 years, and in their 4th year, they can apply for lawful permanent residence status. Okay. Among those immigration benefits that can lead to lawful permanent residence are, the family-based petitions, VAWA for victims of domestic violence, asylum, temporary protected status, the special immigrant juvenile status visas for children, employment-based visas, which we typically don't do at the foundation, but it is a way for people to get status, and then cancellation or removal, which is a defense to removal. It's not an affirmative benefit. And oftentimes, people will tell us, well, we have a child with special needs. We've been here for a long time. We heard, that there's a way for us to get permanent resident status. And unfortunately, there is no affirmative process for that. But in the event that families are placed in removal proceedings, they can apply for cancellation as a defense to removal.
Can you explain if that's how they qualify to remain? Is there like statutory timeframes, or do they get to stay indefinitely? So they don't get status, but they get to, I guess, remain here. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Is this for cancellation or removal?
Yes.
Okay, so cancellation or removal is a defense to removal, that if the immigration court grants cancellation or removal, it does give them lawful permanent resident status. There is a statutory number that's given each year. So if they are approved for cancellation or removal, but there are no visas available for them at that time, they stay in kind of like deferred action. And then once there is the visa that's available for them, then they become lawful permanent residents, which then, is a permanent status.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So for the family-based visa, which is the most, typical way that people can gain lawful permanent resident, it requires individuals to have a qualifying family member. A visa must be immediately available to them, and they must prove that they are admissible to the United States. If they entered without inspection, they're generally not eligible to apply for adjustment of status in the United States unless they qualify under INA 245I, which provided an opportunity for family members who had a qualifying family member to petition for them before April 30th, 2001. So in these, if they're not 245I eligible and they entered without inspection, the only way that they can get their lawful permanent resident status is to do consular processing, which means that they have to leave the country. The moment that they leave the country, they could be subject to a 3-year bar, a 10-year bar, or a permanent bar. So individuals who have resided in the United States in unlawful presence for 180 days to 1 year, if they depart for a consular processing appointment, they will be subject to a 3-year bar, which means that they can't come back in to the United States unless they qualify for a waiver. For those who have been in the United States for more than 1 year in unlawful presence, when they depart, they would be subject to a 10-year bar. And individuals who have made multiple entries without inspection after having accrued more than a year of unlawful presence could be subject to a permanent bar. There are some waivers that are available for the 3 and the 10-year bars. They have qualifying family members that can show that they would suffer exceptional hardship if their family members are not able to get lawful permanent resident status. What's really, I think, difficult about these waivers is that if it's a U.S. citizen child or a U.S. citizen son or daughter that's petitioning for their parents who entered without inspection, the waiver is not available to them. So I think it's a way that parents of undocumented parents of U.S. citizen children are affected, that they are not eligible for the waivers. But if their qualifying family member is a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen spouse or parent, then they could qualify for the waiver. One of the challenges, oftentimes we hear about, well, why don't people just get in line, and why can't they just get their visas lawfully, right? Why do they enter the United States without inspection? It's because for family-based visas, they're subject to this waiting period. So U.S. citizens can petition for their parents, their spouses, and their minor children, unmarried minor children under the age of 21, and they qualify as immediate family members, which means that they're not subject to a waiting period. But everybody else, the unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, the spouses of lawful permanent residents, the married sons and daughters of citizens, and the brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens, they are subject to these preferences. They give them waiting period. So for example, when we're looking at the waiting periods for Mexico, right, for the unmarried sons and daughters of a US citizens, they're subject to a 22-year wait for a visa, right? The spouses and unmarried children of lawful permanent residents are subject to a 5-year wait. If the children turn 21, then they're considered the 2B category. There's a 22-year wait. For the married children of US citizens, there's a 26-year wait. And for the brothers and sisters, there's a 23-year wait. So for all of the other chargeabilities, these are those that are not from China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. But you can see that the waiting periods are very long. And while they're waiting for their visas to become available, they're not eligible for work authorization, and they are at risk of being detained and removed. So our goal is really to try to move, people to lawful permanent resident status, which of course grants them a pathway to U.S. citizenship. They are usually, they have work authorization, they're eligible for some benefits, they can travel outside of the United States and re-enter with their lawful permanent resident status. And their status does not expire, except that the card expires every 10 years. So the goal is really to try to get them to become citizens as soon as they're eligible, especially because, even though their card says they're permanent residents, their status is never permanent until they become citizens. Okay. So of course, citizenship is the best form, is the best protection for individuals because they cannot be deported. They have the right to vote. They can travel indefinitely, which means that they can be out of the country for, 5, 10, 15 years and come back without any problems. Whereas lawful permanent residents, if they are out of the country for more than 6 months, there are other grounds of inadmissibility that can come into play, and the government can always deem a person to have abandoned their residence, in which case they would be placed in removal proceedings. But once they're citizens, that's never an issue. They can also apply for, government jobs. They can apply for immigrant visas for more relatives and a lawful permanent residence, and they have unrestricted access to public benefits. I wanted to just kind of give you like this visual about, the rights and benefits of U.S. citizens, which, we've talked about already, about authorization to work, eligibility for federal financial aid, education. They have no restriction on travel. They can petition for family members. They're eligible for public assistance without, waiting periods or none of the restrictions. And then when we look at, they're authorized to be in the United States. Then when we look at the lawful permanent residents, you see that even though, they have many more rights and benefits than undocumented individuals, right? There are some restrictions, right? So they can't remain outside of the United States for lengthy periods of time. They cannot petition, for their parents or their siblings, and they're subject to these long waiting periods. They're eligible for some public assistance, but not to the same extent that U.S. citizens. And there is always this risk, right, that if they are out of the country, if they commit crimes, or they're deemed to have committed, fraud at any point, then they're subject to being placed in removed proceedings. But the good thing is that there is a pathway to citizenship, which is always really important. However, anytime a person is applying for any type of immigration benefit, they are giving the Immigration Service that authorization to review their whole status. So at this time, it's really important that before any person applies for any immigration benefit, that they are working with an immigration expert, an immigration attorney that can review their eligibility for that. Then when we look at the undocumented immigrants, of course, then they have even less access to resources, to benefits. They are still entitled to free public education. And thanks to the advocacy of CRLA Foundation and a number of other groups working with Health for All and other coalition, they are becoming, eligible for more public assistance, especially, with Medi-Cal. But there are still, very many restrictions, and there's always a concern that families have about applying for public assistance, even for their US citizen children, because they're really concerned about the public charge issue. Okay. For non-citizens, whether they're undocumented, they're in any type of a immigrant or non-immigrant visa, there's always this issue, right, about how legalized marijuana or even being employed in the cannabis industry will affect them, right? And even though, states have legalized medical marijuana and recreational use of marijuana for immigration purposes, anything related to controlled substance remains a federal offense, including possession of marijuana. So this is something that is really important for the communities to be informed about how this issue. We know that many farm workers have been, recruited to work in the cannabis industry, and many of them, come to us and they said, they presented us with these documents that they had the permit. So we thought, we were authorized, to work in this industry, without them realizing that, their employment in the cannabis industry could cause them to not be able to regularize their immigration status. In some cases, when they're applying for naturalization, it comes up, you have to, in your naturalization application, you have to list your employment. So if you indicate that you've worked in the cannabis industry, even, sometimes putting the name of like the dispensary that you work at, and you are only working as like a janitor and not really handling the marijuana, in that case, the government can still consider that the person is ineligible for naturalization because they're barred from showing good moral character during the entire period that they are working in the cannabis industry. This is extremely difficult for people who have severe medical conditions in which medical marijuana has been prescribed. And so oftentimes, people will have to make the decision whether to apply for naturalization or, continue with these medical recommendations, right? So in these cases, we provide information to the applicants about how marijuana affects their eligibility to apply for benefits, and ultimately they need to make those decisions of how they move forward. This information is usually something that will only come out if the applicants disclose that information, right? So really educating people about these impacts is really important so that they can make an informed decision about how they move forward with their immigration status. The federal law does not provide an exception for medical use. So, any person that, possesses, gives away, sells, cultivates, or imports or exports marijuana is barred from immigration benefits. They can be deportable under certain circumstances. They are considered inadmissible if they travel and try to come back. And as I mentioned, they are temporarily barred from establishing good moral character for naturalization purposes. And in some cases, they could be considered to be aggravated felons if they are deemed to have been trafficking in drugs, which is not just, transporting the information, but even for people who are working in the cannabis industry, and there is the transportation of the product, right? Those people that are working in that industry could be evaluated for drug trafficking. Okay, so our advice, of course, is don't use or work in the cannabis industry until you're a US citizen. Okay, sorry. We only had 10 minutes, so hopefully I didn't go too much over, but if there are, questions, I know there will be a question period after that, but if there are, any other questions, feel free to email me or give me a call. I've listed my personal cell phone on there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Magda. That was really informative. I know I have some questions, but I want to turn to my colleague. Isidore, did you have a question?
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Professor, for the presentation. I was wondering if we could get a copy of your PowerPoint.
Yes, I will send it to Ms. Flores and to Chairwoman Hasid. or I can send it to Santiago.
Chairwoman has seen it as preferable because Ms. Flores, she's not going to give it to me.
Okay.
I'm just
Yes,
kidding.
I will forward it. Yes, of course.
I'm just kidding. I'm going to pay for that, I know.
Oh, man, LA board members. Board Member Flores.
I just want to say first and foremost, thank you for just such a thorough breakdown of a very complex issue. And I had two questions. One, my first question is essentially, I know having been a practitioner and having worked with folks from varying statuses, the almost inevitably the desired outcome is naturalization, right? And there's this goal of achieving citizenship. However, and you know, that's a desirable goal, but I know a few years ago there was kind of this movement of denaturalization, right? So folks that obtain their citizenship by virtue of being born in the US, you know, you can't denaturalize those folks, but folks that adjust their status, whether it be through a family member or through an employer, et cetera, and they, you know, achieve their LPR status and then they become naturalized citizens. Is there such a thing as being able to denaturalize someone? And in what kind of, under which circumstances is that even possible?
Great. Thank you. It's a great question. You know, I think we ran into more of an denaturalization under the Trump administration. We haven't seen those under the Biden administration, and we had not really seen those under other administration. So in their evaluation, right, when people apply for US citizenship, you know, we would hope that at that point they're granted their citizenship, and that is it. Under the Trump administration, they did request that a lot of these cases be reevaluated, right? So they were looking at people who had legalized under the SAW program, right? So they were looking to make sure that, you know, people actually worked in agriculture during that time. They were also, you know, looking at people whose father or mother were lawful permanent residents and petitioned for them, and then wanted to make sure that they had remained unmarried until they got their lawful permanent resident status. So they were really looking to see whether or not there were any instances of fraud. There was also some, because there was such a backlog in getting even some of like the FBI records, there were people that might have committed crimes and either did not disclose them because they forgot about them, or they didn't have like the necessary information. When they went back and they looked at these cases, right, they found, well, you know, this person, you know, committed a crime and was inadmissible at a last entry, so they were not eligible for their green card, and then put them in denaturalization proceedings. So there is a process. It's not like it automatically gets taken away. Their certificate, you know, it's like don't turn in your certificate. There is a process in which they have to have a hearing, and an investigation is conducted, right? And if they find that there was fraud or that the person was not eligible, then they do denaturalize them. And then, you know, the next step is to evaluate whether or not they are still eligible to be lawful permanent residents.
All right, and I just had one more question, and thank you for that thorough answer. In our work, we found, especially during the COVID pandemic, one of the kind of markers that we saw was that there were a lot of mixed generation or multi-generation farm worker households, and with different like parents and uncles and et cetera living together. And as someone that grew up in a multi-generational household, but also a mixed status household, I wonder if you can speak a little bit about, you know, the kind of the complexities, right, of living in a mixed status household where you might have, you know, US citizen children living with folks that have TPS, or, you know, folks that are undocumented, et cetera, and the kind of the impact that has on folks living in this kind of limbo, right? Not knowing and figuring out how to navigate those statuses.
Right. No, thank you. It's a critical issue that we have seen in different contexts. And I think, oftentimes the families, sometimes we have US citizen students who say, I'm not going to apply for FAFSA. I'm not going to apply for financial aid because my parents are undocumented and I don't want them to be deported as a result of me applying for financial aid. So oftentimes they forego their college dreams because they're trying to protect their parents. Also, the fear of parents being separated from their children if they apply for benefits, even though their children would clearly qualify, right? So these are issues that I think, require a lot of community education. A couple of our units actually really, focus on providing that education, but those are really really critical issues because that fear, and we saw a lot of this right under the previous administration where parents were apprehended and deported after they had dropped off their children at school. So I think that fear of being separated from their children have caused so much fear that people are not applying for benefits that they are entitled to, even for their children, right? So we saw this with the pandemic, with the floods, with the fires, which continue to push families further into poverty. And even though there are these benefits, resources that are available to them, they are not applying for them because they are so afraid of the immigration implications on their status or their ability to regularize their status in the future.
Thank you. I do have some other questions, Magda. If you're able to stick around for the end, maybe
Yes.
we can come back, but I want to see, are there any other questions? And then I want to get to our next panelist. Okay. Julie?
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate the presentation, Magda. So just a quick question. I'm sure you're aware that the Department of Homeland Security last fall issued an announcement about providing deferred action for immigrants who are participating in labor investigations and labor cases with labor departments such as ours and others, and that there's actually been a lot more publicity about that, right? And just out there about people can potentially get temporary status or at least have deferred action on immigration consequences if they're participating with a investigation. And so my question is whether Sierra Leone Foundation is conducting outreach about that. And just, I know there's a lot of concerns about it, right? I mean, I personally have concerns, and that this may be just flagging people for Homeland Security that shouldn't necessarily be flagged, and that this is just a temporary measure, and if the administration changes, that could really expose folks to heightened risk. So just keeping all that in mind, I guess my question is, what is Sierra Leone's view on that, and how are you going about messaging on that, if at all? And do you have any recommendations for us as a labor enforcement agency on that?
Great, thank you. So, we are getting more requests. We are getting referrals on these cases. We are just taking a cautious approach right now because we are trying to kind of figure out, what the best approach is about applying for this kind of deferred action, right? We think that under this administration, there would be minimal risk of removal, but we just don't know with the future administration, given the prospects, right, of what the other side would do. However, when we're doing the evaluations of these cases, we're also screening, is there any criminal conduct, or is there anything that would make them an enforcement issue, right? So where there is none of that, then we think it's lower risk for applying for these benefits. We haven't, I think, many of the organizations are like, have you filed any, what's the outcome? And it's too soon, but we are all, trying to share information, and as soon as, you know, the first one gets granted, I think that that will probably, you know, open up the doors for more. We are working with a couple of others, and I think because there's so much fear about immigration, right? They're like, we'll take care of like the labor stuff, we're getting the certification, but the immigration is much more complicated, right? And it's more resource intensive. So we are looking at that, and we're going to be working with the consulates and other community-based organizations to get more information out there. I think that the information that your agency has put out, as well as some of the other, you know, national immigration organizations, is really helpful. But we're still trying to figure out the practical aspects of it, right? And the likelihood of success on these cases.
Great, thank you so much.
Mhm.
Thank you. And then we'll go to member Lightstone.
And then we'll move to our
Hi, thank you very much, Amagda. That was very thorough. Really appreciate the class on immigration law. My one question is just is the question of, is there anything practical that come to mind about H-2A workers who might assert some rights here and then don't get fired immediately, but aren't brought, when they, even if they've come here for many years, aren't selected to come back in retaliation for asserting their rights?
Mhm. Right. Yeah, there are a number of cases that we have seen, right? And I think, and especially in those cases where the H-2A workers are trying to assert their rights and then they get terminated or they're not put back. And also, sadly, so with female farm workers that are being victimized with sexual harassment and others, and where their employers will threaten them or not bring them back because of sexual harassment issues and discrimination. So we are, you know, there's a number of organizations that do provide Know Your Rights information on there and are actually filing cases on behalf of these workers. But we are also seeing, you know, even like right now that there's a case that you know, we're looking at where current H-2A workers, you know, have been coming back for many years, are now not going to be considered because they're bringing in new groups where the employers think that they can hire them at even less of the wages than they were applying for. So these are issues that continue to come up. And so these Know Your Rights presentations and like informational bulletins that you can come up with, and a number of other organizations are putting out there, but there aren't very many organizations that focus on the H-2A workers. And, you know, CRLA Inc. and CRLA Foundation are definitely looking at these issues, but there's still also like a lot of fear, right? Because at some point, these workers, if they remain here, even when they're asserting their rights, would become undocumented, right? Except, you know, to the extent that they would qualify for this deferred action, which is something that is really important to piece these together.
Thank you. Okay, next, we'll go to our next panelist, Dr. Ed Flores with the UC Merced Labor Center. I believe I saw him come on. Is he back? Do we have Dr. Flores? Saw him pop up briefly.
I'm not seeing.
Okay, well, we will hopefully come back to him. Member Flores, if you could reach out maybe and just see what's going on there, that would be great. Next we have, oh, yes?
And I believe Luz will also be rejoining us at 11:30.
Okay.
So I'll reach out to Dr. Flores.
Okay, all right. Why don't we take a quick 5-minute break? I think the interpreter probably needs a break as well, and then we will return. Come back at 11:25.
The comment period's open. If they want.
All right, everyone. Thank you, and thanks for getting that little break. Also, friendly reminder to please speak, and I need this probably more than anyone, to try and speak slowly, so our interpreter can keep up with us. Appreciate all her work, and thanks, and don't hesitate to remind us again. Next, I am pleased to introduce Luz Gallegos, the Executive Director of TODEC. We have had the opportunity to meet with Luz on several different issues, and when we were putting this panel together, Cynthia and I agreed that she would be an excellent person to help inform kind of what she sees in her region of the state and with the populations that she works with in terms of immigration status within the farm worker community and how it impacts them in terms of exercising their rights and accessing certain benefits. And I know that's been an issue of hers and one she's been working on for a long time. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Luz from TODEC. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Can I share my screen?
Yes. Yes, Santiago will make sure to authorize that. I think he's doing so now. Okay.
Okay. So thank you for the opportunity for this. I know our compañera from Sierra Leone did an amazing job talking about the different reliefs that we have available for immigrants here in the state. But as Cynthia, as you all reached out to us, and I really wanted to present what we see on the ground and why we do what we do. And it's I think it's our obligation. It is our obligation in our conscience to do whatever it is that we have to do to elevate the community's realities and challenges, but also to create systems that address their needs. So here I share one of our compañeros. His name is Luis. And this is when his younger years, many, many years ago here in Coachella, him and his friends, his co-workers working in the fields. Fast forward, Luis is now 48 years old, and he recently lost his eyesight in one of his eyes. This is not new to us. We are seeing these impacts within our ag community, and public health is relating it to long COVID. And this is one of the many stories that I could share. Luis has worked in our community for many decades, working in the fields, harvesting the food that we eat. And he's sharing with us more than ever that his employer, although he continued to work, he continued to work at his company, but he started losing his mobile skills. He lost his eyesight in one of his eyes, but he still continued to work because what he told us is something that's very common to us. Si no trabajo, mi familia no come. If I don't work, my family does not eat. So this is not new to us. We've been hearing this for even before COVID, right? And now more with COVID, and now more post-COVID, and the impact that long COVID is having on our ag community is very, very serious. We need to make sure that employers are respecting our workers. Luis was laid off because he couldn't work at the same pace as he used. Like you see him, he was very strong back then. He gave his best working years of his life to our state. Now, when he's been laid off, he doesn't have access to unemployment benefits, any type of benefits. Him and his wife are undocumented. The only son that he had passed away due to COVID. He was the only one that was a U.S. citizen that he thought that maybe at some time he could receive some type of benefit from him when he turned of age. Unfortunately, his son passed away. So the issues and the realities and the challenges that our farm workers have are very, very layered as they impact not only their health and well-being, but also housing. You know, it impacts them in the totality, everything that we see. That's why for us, it's very important to share the stories and to give the faces of these workers that have given their working life, their best years to our state. That's why UC Merced's study is so important. That's why we were one of the organizations that participated along with, I think it was 9 of us, I believe, not sure how many of us we were, participated across the state to survey the workers. We were TODEC led in our region, in the Inland Empire, particularly here in Coachella, where the workers, amplified the issues they've been having. So I know I saw you, Senior, said to be part of this conversation. And for us, for us, it's personal that the work that we do as we're talking to workers on the daily basis, being within the community, that we're also educating and informing them about what we have here in California, because as we know, there's no process currently, there's no immigration reform to help bring relief for immigrants that do not qualify for our current immigration reliefs. But there are laws in the state that have been passed through educating and informing government about the needs. And it's our obligation to make sure not only to elevate stories when these policies are going through legislature, but then when it comes to implementation, that we're actually making sure that they're being well implemented. I want to share some of our education and outreach that we do within TODEC to be at the grassroots level. And this is something that our teams do daily, on the daily basis, to inform our workers and to let them know about their rights, as it is with immigrants, be it undocumented or documented, and letting them know about the services that we offer, and also the services that our partners offers, like ALRB, connecting them to other partners and so forth. But through this work that we do, the importance of workers, that they know their rights, that they know even though they're undocumented, that our Constitution says no human being is illegal. We might be undocumented, but if we know our rights, we could be safe from any type of situation that would put us at risk of deportation. So we've created a lot of tools to provide to community so they know their rights in different languages here in our region. We have a Purepecha community, so our staff is trilingual, and getting the information out to community, letting them know to be careful of fraud. We still get some receive information from community members. A couple of months ago, one of our community members showed us a screen he took of social media saying that there is immigration reform, and that somebody in Imperial was charging them $600 to get on the list. This type of information is fraud. So it's our job and obligation to make sure to express, to let community know their rights, but also to be aware about different situations that may arise that could potentially put them at risk. And then also, to let them know that we have these free legal services and screenings to see if there's anything within immigration law that they could actually get some type of immigration relief, so they know their options. And if they do have options, and if they don't, at least so they know they walk away knowing their rights, so they know they know not to pay anybody for any type of relief. But then also making sure that we are detecting if they are eligible for, there's opportunity with new visas, especially if there's some type of criminal activity at work sites and so forth. There is something that workers can take advantage. So we do this through, through working and with the community. So in identifying if there's any potential immigration relief that they could possibly have. But I just, through that, I want to share, we have created a lot of different tools, a lot of different state laws that we have in the state of California that protect and defend our immigrants community. So, these are some of the publications we have in TODEC that we've created to inform community. This one is huge, and this is something that AB 450, a lot of workers don't know. Even some of our folks, other agency partners are not aware of the opportunity we have with AB 450. That, if ICE wants to do a raid, it's a raid, they call it an audit. In any company, they have to give heads up to the company 72 hours beforehand, right? And then the company has to notify their employers to let them know there's an audit going to happen. And at that point, it's up to the workers if they're gonna be able to work that day or not. So it's important for all of us to be aware of all these state laws that, that have been now implemented in our state. And so we could continue providing these resources to our workers, and then also making them aware of, the laws that they should be aware of, like the marijuana, Prop 64, all these that really criminalize immigrants, not only undocumented immigrants and immigrants that are protected under DACA, but also those that are legal permanent resident that are not yet U.S. citizen, right? So I heard from the compañera earlier the importance of citizenship, and that's something that's so important. That's why we within TODIC, we have our 40-year-old campaign, Naturalize IE, to make sure that all our immigrant legal permanent residents that are able to naturalize do it and take advantage of that, because that's a way to protect our stay here in this country. And we have created tools, even Know Your Rights for permanent residents. And this was very important, especially during the last administration, where we continue to see that a lot of even our legal permanent residents were being criminalized, even at the border as they were trying to come back from vacation, So, it's very important that the work we continue to inform our community about the rights, not only the rights, but also state laws that protect, but also state laws that could hurt community. Because although we have a lot of laws that protect us, but we also tell community members that they also are responsible. We have to hold them responsible, that they have to follow the law, and that they have to be aware of situations that could put them at risk if they commit any type of crime. So this is some of the work that we do within TODIC. We, within our free legal services, our Naturalize IE campaign has helped close to 300,000 immigrants in the Inland Empire to become U.S. citizens. Not all farm workers are undocumented. A lot of them received their legal status through the amnesty in the 80s through IRCA. So the work from TODIC is not just providing and elevating their stories to create policies and systems that address their needs and address their challenges, but also to empower them to make sure that they're making sure that they're actually applying through these different free services that we have, and through different funds that we offer. We have not only the free assistance for these services through citizenship and DACA, but we're also paying the fees for immigration. So this is some of the work that we've been doing. The realities that we hear from community members are very layered, and that's why the importance for us to continue to work together with your staff here has been so important and so crucial, that we are kind of all connecting the resources to each other. But then also it's important to continue to put in the face of the challenges of our workers, especially workers that don't have access to privilege, like Luis, that now he cannot work and he doesn't have access to anything. He doesn't have access to any CalFresh. He doesn't have access to food. They're relying on our local food banks, which are amazing in providing the food, but the need is so much higher that, now what are they going to do if they can't afford the rent? So we have seen a lot of our farm workers actually go back to their home country. And in the conversations we've had is that, they don't see that they're ever going to get any type of immigration relief here, any type of assistance. DACA impacted their bottom line, their economy, that they can't afford the rents. The rents are really high. So, we are losing our workforce. And as we continue to know that ag is the backbone of our state's economy, we need to do more to protect our workers, that they actually have access to unemployment benefits. That is very well highlighted on the UC Merced study, as well as food and housing. So that's something that I wanted to share. And I don't know if y'all have any questions, but we are always here to help and support. But the work that we do is just so personal, and we're so passionate about it because we see the struggle at the grassroots with our workers that we wish we could resolve all of their issues, but it's spaces like this where we're sharing their stories that creates those systems. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Luz. And I have to say, I've heard had the opportunity to hear you share some of these stories, and they still, they're gutting. They just are, and I really thank you for just all the work that you do to really uplift and amplify the population that you serve. It just is so important, and so really appreciate the generosity of your time and your work. I have questions I think I'd like to throw to the whole panel, but I will hold those until the end. So I'm going to look to my colleagues to see if anyone has any specific questions for Luz at this time. And any one of our other participants in the meeting? Okay, well, please stick around because I do have some other questions I want to, would love to get your thoughts on. I did see Dr. Flores here. I believe he's joined us. Hi, Dr. Flores. You're on mute. Dr. Edward Flores is with the UC Merced Community Labor Center, and as has been referenced several times, he and his colleague, Executive Director of the Center, Ana Padilla, and others worked to do the farm worker health study, which was a very in-depth survey of California's farm worker population, touching on a variety of issues that all feed into our health and our well-being. And feel very fortunate. I know we had a few different logistical issues, but I'm so excited that you were able to join us today. And just want to highlight the center organized an event to introduce the study, and they've been doing in February, and they gathered 200 individuals. It was probably the largest gathering I've been in since the start of the pandemic, and they had workers and advocates and members of local, state, and federal agencies participate, and it was just such a powerful convening to share this information that this study, a similar one was conducted by Sears, the California Institute for Rural Studies, 20 years ago, and while we've made many improvements in some sense, things are still remain the same in terms of some of the challenges that this population serves and sort of the diminished access to services and other benefits. So I'm excited to the rest of my colleagues and the public will get the benefit of this information. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Flores. And just a reminder to go off mute. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you to the ALRB for giving us, a few minutes to present findings from our research that are relevant for this conversation. I apologize for running late. Today was the last day of teaching, and my class conflicted with this meeting. But anyways, so I'm here. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share and just share a few slides. Is that okay?
Yes, and Santiago will help facilitate. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to share just a few slides from the presentation that Victoria had referenced from the release of the report of the Farm Worker Health Study back on February 3rd. So the purpose of the study was to determine the health status of farm workers in California. And our secondary aim was to investigate the impact of the social determinants of health on farm worker health. Usually when people talk about social determinants of health, it's like air, water, soil, some other things might include healthcare access, healthcare coverage. For us specifically, we wanted to know more about the experiences that farm workers had in the workplace and how that was relevant for their health. So we saw this study as an intervention into the field of public health, asking about questions that about work that hadn't been asked in a lot of other, either hadn't been asked very often or not at all in previous studies of farm worker health. So we worked with the Community Advisory Board that had 26 farm worker serving community worker and labor organizations. Want to give a shout out to TODEC because they just referenced the study, and Luz referenced the study in her presentation. So TODEC was one of the organizations that was on the Community Advisory Board. And out of these 26 organizations, there were 10, including TODEC, that helped to collect interviews for the study. So that the CAB really provided strategic input in every step of the study, developing the survey instrument, like what questions, what issue areas and which questions we should be asking about, how to collect the data, collecting the data, and then planning the dissemination event on February that Victoria mentioned. So 10 organizations from the Community Advisory Board conducted 1,242 in-person interviews with farm workers. The interview length was 2 to 4 hours in length, and they were conducted in 6 different languages, including 4 indigenous languages: Mixteco, Triqui, Zapotec, and Ilocano. What I'll share about the farm worker health study is that it matched many of the demographics that we know to be true of farm workers in California, based on other surveys that that the census does. 88% of our respondents spoke Spanish. 91% were foreign born. The median year that they arrived to the U.S. was 2001. 99% were Latino. Roughly half of the state's farm workers live in the San Joaquin Valley. So our the percentage of farm workers living in the valley in our survey was a little bit less than half, because we wanted to make sure that we had sizable numbers from other regions with farm workers in the state, like the Central Coast, Imperial and Coachella Valley, the Sonoma-Napa region. As we know, farm workers work full-time, but they have a profile of economic and class disadvantage. Many of them work for a third party, like a contractor. In our sample, 68% worked for a contractor instead of a grower. They have low earnings. The median wage, for a farm worker in our survey was $16,000 a year, and many have to travel away from home for their work. In our sample, 22% fit the federal designation of a migrant farm worker who, at some point of the year, had to live 75 miles or more away from home. Okay, so all of this vulnerability, and I apologize for this slide being a little blurry, but all of this vulnerability, is related to the experiences that farm workers have in the workplace. 19% of respondents said that at some point they had experienced a wage theft. 15% said that they were paid all or part in cash, suggesting misclassification. 15% said that they didn't receive the minimum number of rest breaks. So there's a lot of issues concerning wage and hour provisions among this very vulnerable workforce population. As we know, the state has implemented innovative reforms in workplace health and safety, such as the California Heat Standard or the Wildfire Smoke Standard. But when we ask questions about compliance with workplace health and safety, we found that that there was substantial non-compliance. 43% of our sample said that their employer never provided a posted heat illness prevention plan at the job. 20% said that their employer never monitored temperature on hot days. 22% said that they never monitored for heat illness when it was over 95 degrees. 15% said that they were never provided enough shade during breaks when it was over 80 degrees. In terms of wildfire smoke, 32% said that when they needed respirators, they were always lacking them. And as far as pesticides training, only 9% of our sample said that they applied pesticides on the job, but out of those people, only 25% of those 25% of those said that they had not received any training at all on the use of pesticides. There's a relationship between the vulnerability that that farm workers experience on the job and the conditions on those jobs. When we asked them if they would be willing to report non-compliance that they witness at the workplace, 1 in 3, 36% said they would be unwilling to report employer non-compliance if they witnessed it. And when we asked those people why they would be unwilling to report. 64% said they would be unwilling to report due to fear of retaliation. And this included loss of job, loss of hours, as well as deportation. And then the last slide I'll share was that when we asked farm workers if they qualified for unemployment benefits, which is a proxy for immigration status, because it's only undocumented workers that are not eligible for unemployment benefits. 59% said that they were not eligible for unemployment benefits, indicating that 59% were undocumented. 67% said they worried about family separation due to deportation. This was a low wage, vulnerable workforce with, the majority of whom lacked legal residence, and shared that they would be, a substantial number would be unwilling to report non-compliance in large part because of fear of retaliation, such as job loss or deportation. So our report ends with some policy recommendations to continue investing public resources in protecting worker rights. So, this includes education, but also enforcement, as well as investing public resources in ag development that raises industry standards. We know, ag gets a lot of, historically has gotten subsidies from the government. So there's a lot of new innovative models for raising industry standards through development, such as the high road model. And we think, public resources should be aligned with those more innovative approaches that the state is taking in regards to economic development. We also had some other recommendations like expanding access to the economic safety net, like creating an unemployment benefit system for undocumented immigrants. Right now, SB 227 would do just that. We also recommend expanding access to the healthcare safety net, and in general, expanding healthcare access, because someone may have health insurance, but having a provider, for example, in a place like Madera, where the only community hospital shut down, are still issues in the rural regions where farm workers concentrate. That's the presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Thank you. I'll first see if any of my colleagues have any questions for Dr. Flores in particular, or anyone from our staff. Okay. I do have a few questions they're both for you, Dr. Flores, as well as kind of open it up to our other panelists. One, I'm wondering what, and I really appreciate the detail in the study. It was very informative. One thing that I'm wondering about as you are encountering farm workers is what, are you seeing any workers that are here that are DACA? I know we've talked about the aging of this workforce. That's something that I've been trying to get a little bit of a sense of.
Well, we didn't, the only question we had relevant to their status was eligibility for unemployment insurance, which we used as a proxy, but we did not have any questions specifically about what their immigration status was. And this was the nature of the award. It came from the California Department of Public Health, and it was something that they said that, just in terms of what was in the agreement, it wasn't something that we were supposed to be asking about.
And then Amanda or Luz, do either of you have you encountered many DACA recipients in ag?
We have a high number of DACA recipients, and also those that are waiting for DACA. We have undocumented students that are attending college and working in the field. So yes, we do have, but we also have a large amount of folks that are citizens, U.S. citizens, and also LPRs that are still studying or waiting to become citizens. And of course, we're trying to create awareness for them to do so. But we do have a mixed status. It's not just undocumented farm workers, but we have all documented, those that are protected under DACA, undocumented, and also legal permanent residents and U.S. citizens.
Amanda?
Yes, and we have a similar experience, and I think, you know, part of it too has been with the mixed status families. Again, you know, just, you know, the fear of applying for benefits just kind of really creates this sense of urgency to do any type of work to help the family kind of overcome whatever financial challenges they're going through. So it is, we're trying to do more education around, you know, just even the documented to be applying as consultants or others, that where they wouldn't have to kind of provide additional information on their families and things like that. So, but it is, the mixed status families is like in all of the fields, but primarily in the farm worker and the rural communities in agriculture.
Another question I have for all of the panelists, although CRLAF and TODEC may have more insights into this, is I've been very disturbed and troubled by recent reports, and we're seeing an increase in child labor, and specifically in migrant labor. There was a major series in the New York Times discussing discovering a lot of migrant children that have been, as they get out of detention, are then going and working with many food processing plants, particularly in the Midwest. And there was another piece a couple weeks ago on John Oliver's program about farm workers in general that also discussed child labor. One thing that was not covered or touched on was really if that's really going on in California. And I know there are different exceptions that do allow for younger individuals to work, particularly in ag, but it's something that, you know, as we talk about how this population is afraid to come forward, I do have major concerns about our most vulnerable. And I'm wondering if you've seen anything recently and what agencies can do, I guess, to help uncover that. Anyway, turn it to whoever would like to take that on.
I believe the partnership is very important, especially within all our agencies, as it relates to the situation you just shared. As you know, there's opportunities for immigrants that have at some type of level of criminal activity, especially around U visas. So what we always ask our partners, if there's, you know, if they feel that there's any, if they come across any type of situation, especially around the scenario that you just posed, to refer to legal entities like ourselves. So that way we could do a legal screening to see if there's a possibility of any type of immigration relief. We have through referrals and also from our personal outreach, making a community aware of these free legal screenings is just so crucial that sometimes community members feel that, you know, there's no immigration reform, no amnestia, I don't have an opportunity. But by them receiving a legal screening from an immigration attorney or by an accredited organization has been a life change for them to see if there's any type of immigration relief that we have currently that they might be eligible for.
Thank you. And I'd like to second that, because I think that so many of the families, and even in the trafficking context, which I think is where we have seen some of these words, like the whole family, you know, is then prevented from like leaving and everybody has to work at the threat of, you know, family members being hurt and things like that. So I think, you know, to the extent that the labor agencies can assist with the certification, because there's still so much fear of going to law enforcement to report these, right? So there's less of that, I think, concern and tension with working with the labor departments or the agencies. You know, I think oftentimes it's that fear of law enforcement that is really preventing people from reporting. And especially in the trafficking context, they're just not even able to get to anyone to report.
Have you, labor trafficking and trafficking in general has been a big focus in California. I think one of the things, I have not dealt with it personally in terms of, or very much, I should say, from a policy perspective. But I'm wondering, you know, this came up with the tragic events of Half Moon Bay, and those are still being investigated by various agencies, but there was some discussion about how it can be challenging for labor entities and law enforcement entities to kind of make a trafficking case. They're complex. And I'm wondering if you can share any reflections on that from your own experiences.
Yeah, I think that it is, you know, challenging in some of the trafficking cases that we have worked on, you know, more recently. And I think we found the biggest obstacles under the last administration, right? Where it was almost like law enforcement was trying to find the workers at fault, right? And especially like in the cannabis industry, right? It was just really like the willingness, like you all we're looking for these jobs and things like that. So in those contexts is where we have found the greatest kind of pushback, even from like law enforcement, right? In those cases where the trafficking has occurred within the cannabis industry.
Thank you. And then Luz, have you, I don't know if TODEC works on that type of work or you partner with other organizations.
Yes, I agree with what the compañera just mentioned. The cannabis industry has been, I mean, that's why we created tools like the ones I shared around Beware, about especially for undocumented immigrants that are at risk. So it's the importance of the education on the ground and creating these tools and creating them in multiple languages. We even got to we even do short videos because many of our workers do not know how to read and write. So we create videos so they could listen. So I think the education piece is so important because it's about creating awareness. So community members are well educated and they know their rights. And also so they know what they're getting into, especially when they're getting employed by these different entities that could put themselves at risk and create some more hardship than what they already have. So education is important. So we do appreciate the partnership of ALRB. And I think it's important, these opportunities and these conversations. So also your teams within ALRB are aware of organizations like ours that we, you know, that you all could refer to us, and because we refer to each other always, but we could help with, especially with situations like this, that we could actually provide free legal assistance and legal screenings, especially for those vulnerable communities.
Thank you. And then one additional question I had was, you know, certainly we've seen a lot of ebb and flow in terms of what is being telegraphed federally in terms of how welcoming or not welcoming the U.S. is to immigrants and how friendly they are. Certainly under the Trump administration, it was a central part of their platform to be anti-immigrant and frankly anti-people of color. And I know under the Biden administration, there have been various efforts such as the discretionary prosecution effort, a number of other initiatives to try and roll back some of those anti-immigrant policies. But I'm wondering, as practitioners on the ground, and Dr. Flores, you know, your study kind of covered this change a little bit, but what are you seeing in terms of the level of fear in the population? Are you seeing that has receded a bit with the change in administration, or is that still constant? And just any other reflections you have related to that?
I'm not, I think that the fear is still there because there's just like, so much media on there. I think, one of the additional concerns right now is that, the communities kind of sees a shift in the priorities, right? And in the immigrant communities that they're focusing on, and that perhaps the rural communities are not being attended to or don't have the same access to the resources and the representation. The reality, I think, for those of us on the ground is that the need is so much greater than we're able to address. And the time that it takes to do the investigations and the resources for these cases is pretty great, right? And the resources, I think that is still an issue. For us, at least. I know that, we are at a point where we have like a wait list of people that are waiting even on like U visas and on the family based. And so as we're trying to kind of address that, and luckily, I know CDSS has been, through the legislature, has been putting like more funds out there to address the needs of the rural communities, but it's that, I think the expertise that's still needed. So we're hoping that, as more resources are brought into the rural communities, that they can kind of address that. But the need for community education is critical, right? Both so that people understand what remedies are available and what their rights are, what their resources are, and maybe to address some of that fear that people have in coming forward, because family separation, I think, is still at the top of people's concerns.
Yes, and just to add, to be honest, as far as the past administration, of course, our community the fear was at its highest, but now with the new administration, there's a little bit of hope. But then at the same time, it's a time of desperation right now for our community when, their economic situation hasn't gotten any better. It has gotten worse. Their bills are piling up. Their evictions notices are real. And undocumented immigrants and undocumented farm workers don't have access to any program. We continue to say what the federal government's not doing, our state is doing it, but it's through organizing and elevating realities and challenges to create systems. But to be honest, the root of the problem is our immigration system. And that's always a conversation every time we talk to the workers or we have sessions where we're out in the fields. Y la mica para cuando, when is when are we going to get immigration relief? Biden talked about it. All the presidents talk about it. I think at this point, community is they're just writing it at this point. They don't know who to believe. They don't see anything coming down. We just hear a lot of things on the news, but nothing really is coming down. But it's also our obligation and our responsibility to inform them about the system that, our democratic system and how it works. But when you're in a struggle, you don't understand systems. You just need the solution to the problem now. So that's why it's up to us as organizations to continue bringing that education and resources that we can to community and to continue to do what we can in our state of California. Just how, CDSS with One California, with the funding that is now for our free immigration legal services, that didn't happen because of magic, that happened because of organizing. So I think we are in California, very proud to be Californian, where we continue to protect and defend immigrants. But it's still not enough when we are seeing our community struggling, when we're trying to get unemployment benefits, when we're trying to get food for all our undocumented workers. They harvest the food for all of us, but sometimes they can't even afford their own food. So the struggle is very real. And hearing stories from community members all of the time, it just makes it even more personal. So, the root of the problem is not having access. And we work on the most high, the communities that are more pressing needs, because we work in border regions where we see Border Patrol patrolling our streets, separating families on the daily, where the struggle is at its highest, but the resources are not hitting the ground. And, it's just right. I continue to say, UC said that the study that we all participated in is just highlights what we've known for so many decades, that we need to write this. We need to make sure that we're holding the state accountable, that we need to take care of our workforce in order for us to continue being the golden state that we are. because we owe it to our farm workers. So that's what I want to say. We need to continue amplifying this study because it sheds the light. The data is there. We've been knowing it, but now we have it in a very sophisticated way to show it off to people in power to address the needs. And just how El Professor had said, you know, there's opportunities right now at the legislature to address these needs, the food for all, safety net for all, these pieces of legislation that would make a great impact to support our farm worker community's needs while we wait for immigration reform to happen.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any other, or other members have questions or comments? Okay. Oh, Member Flores.
I just wanted to say thank you to all the panelists. This has been such a really impactful conversation, and you know, as Chair Hasid mentioned earlier, it's the primer to a deeper dive that we'll be having in a continuation of a part 2. But I think each of you has really set the stage and brought the issue to life in terms of the real complexities of immigration status and how it impacts farm workers' everyday lives, but also within their capacity as workers. So I really appreciate each of you taking the time to be with us this morning/afternoon.
Yes, I'd like to echo that gratitude. It's been so educational, and just really appreciate the generosity of your time and also all that you do in your day-to-day, and I think into your evenings and weekends as well. Really appreciate it, and just want to echo, you know, we've had the opportunity to work with you, and our staff has had the opportunity to work with you in different capacities, but as you've seen, we're in the process of updating our materials, and we've rolled out some other materials specific to the discretionary prosecution effort that the General Counsel and Professor Perez and others have discussed, but really welcome your feedback and an invitation to partner with you on other resources, just as we try and figure out other ways to reach this population and ensure that they do know about rights and benefits and programs available to them. I know our outreach staff are on the meeting. I don't know if they can just go on camera briefly just to wave hello. We have staff in Oxnard, Salinas, Indio, and Visalia, and willing to go, our outreach staff, I should say. We also have staff in Sacramento and Santa Rosa as well, but willing to travel coast to the Nevada border, Arizona, Oregon, and Mexico, and everywhere in between to try and reach this population. So just open invitation to give us feedback or partnership and see what we can do. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for the amazing staff. I know the staff we work with here locally in the Valley, they're amazing, with great heart, including Lucia, that's not here, but she's here with us in spirit and her heart, and she's there for us. So thank you for doing such an amazing job hiring these beautiful human beings that really care and have the compassion that we need for our farm workers. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.
So much. That
Thanks to
concludes
all.
our panel. And I will now turn to see if there's anyone for general public comment. Do we have anyone in the queue?
There's no one in the queue.
Okay. Do any other members of the public wish to make a public comment at this time? Okay, seeing and hearing none, the board will now take a recess, and we will reconvene at 1:30. The board will then go immediately into closed session, and then there will be announcements at the end of that prior to adjournment. So I'll see my other colleagues at 1:30. Thank you.
We'll now move on to announcements. So the next board meeting will be Wednesday, May 17th at 10 a.m. We'll have our notice out this Friday, and that is the only other announcement. And with that, we are now adjourned at 3:01 p.m. Thank you.